Thank you. Thank you, everybody. All right. Welcome to our second annual Racial Equity Professional Institute. It is my pleasure to be here with you all. I won't take up too much of your time. I'm Dr. Kayla Elliott. I'm the Director of Higher Education Policy at the Education Trust. I want to definitely start by thanking Mary, Valeria, and the rest of the team at the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison for being amazing partners in this work and planning the second institute. The first institute in July focused on ensuring access beyond Pell Grant reimplementation. And if you missed that, the recordings are on our website, and I will drop that link in the chat shortly. Today, we'll build on that first session with centering three core topics on equity, and that's affordability, accountability, and advocacy. So we'll start our day with an amazing keynote by Dr. Beth Richie. Dr. Richie is the head of the Department of Criminology, Law, and Justice and a professor of African American Studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. The emphasis of her scholarly and activist work has been on the ways that race and ethnicity and social position affect women's experience of violence and incarceration, focusing on the experiences of African American battered women and sexual assault survivors. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Richie.
Good afternoon, everyone. At least afternoon where I am. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Dr. Elliott. Thank you to the amazing people who are managing all of this behind the scenes. There's stories to tell about my challenges in that way, and you made this seamless. So I'm really very thrilled to have been invited to share some of my thinking, some of my ideas about advocacy, accessibility, and accountability with those of you who are gathered at this really exciting institute. The partnership between the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison and the Educational Trust is really, I think, an inspiring one. And again, I'm pleased to share my brief remarks with you. I hope that they'll stimulate your thinking both today in this session and beyond about what advocacy, accessibility, and accountability mean, what those terms mean, that work means within the context of racial equity for students who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. My thoughts about this matter come from my experiences as a teacher and a learner in three different places. First, I'm a proud member of a teaching collective called the Prison Neighborhood Arts Project, PNAP, and we have a newly formed Abolition Teaching and Learning Network here in Chicago. We teach at Stateville Prison, soon to be expanding to other carceral spaces. And it's from that work that I've come to understand how important education is, and how insufficient it is alone to the broader project of social justice and racial equity. No matter how well we do our work in classroom spaces, that work is insufficient to the broader project of social justice and racial equity unless we do it differently. Second, I want to bring my experience as a faculty member at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where I strive to live up to that part of our mission at UIC that states we are responsible for providing access to higher education for all citizens of Illinois, including those who are criminalized. And there I've learned how slow administrative or institutional change, while important, it's important to engage in that change, has to be matched with more radical work for freedom. That is, it's not enough to open our doors wider. We need to shut down carceral buildings. And third, as an abolition feminist working for justice for criminalized survivors in anti-violence spaces, I've learned how we can't lose sight of the need to build a different world, even as we're changing the spaces that we find ourselves in. We need to change our reality, reduce harm, increase access, be accountable, be advocates in the immediate sense, and we need to have a vision of changing the world. Now, I mentioned those three spaces as my learning spaces because I know what I know and I do what I do from those spaces. I'm humbled to have learned about what higher education has to do with justice, freedom, and abolition from my work inside. So I want to make 3 points in my brief time today. The first point is that working for racial equity for students who are or were incarcerated, for me, is freedom work. It's about justice, and it must be inspired by a commitment to abolition. I already said why I think that's true. It's freedom work. It's about justice and has to be inspired by a commitment to abolition. It's not just about learning. It's about liberation. And more than advancing knowledge, which is important, this work has to be in the pursuit of justice, knowledge for the pursuit of justice. We can't forget, as we move through the institutional limitations that carceral settings create, the programmatic constraints that come from the project of trying to teach inside carceral facilities, the policy battles that we face, like the one around the Pell Grant, or even just the despair that comes from the broader context of working against the mean-spirited carceral state. We have to pay attention to those things, the institutions, the programs, the policy, and the despair that we feel. But as we go about our advocacy work to be more accountable, to expand access, we have to remember that we are abolitionists. We're not just reformers. That means for me, we have to work inside and out. We have to make necessary adjustments, of course, to the context that we are working in, and at the same time, demand transformative change. We have to engage those most affected and effective as learners, as leaders. We have to never compromise our integrity. And sometimes that's a challenge as we're negotiating the actual project of teaching. And part of why we do that, or how we can do that, is to never lose our sense of righteousness and remember that we're always working for dignity. More specifically, when I think of advocacy, I think of the work we do to promote the particular interests of our students in educational programs inside and out, to make sure they get as much of what they need as is possible and what they deserve from the institutions. That's before and after release. That's as students and as graduates and as artists and writers and organizers and policymakers and family members and friends, so they can be all that full person. And when we think about advocacy in that way, we understand that we need to change the institutions themselves, as we said, but we also have to change the world that surrounds us and our students. That is, advocacy in higher education demands that we advocate for freedom in the outside world so that people can be all those things. I have a similar set of thoughts I want to share quickly on the question of access. Of course, we are working to create avenues to further the opportunities and benefits that education can bring, making sure that classes are available, that they're equally distributed, etc. Well, at the same time, we need to do two more things, as if that weren't enough. We need to do two more things. First, we need to understand that abolition work needs to give us access to students as much as students access to us, inside and out. It's not a one-way transaction. That we need the benefit, the brilliance, the experience, the input, the leadership of students in higher education programs, formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated, as much as those students need us. And second, freedom work means that we're not only expanding access, but we're thinking about how we can cut off access, how we actually build barriers and work to end what seems like the endless access into carceral institutions that we teach in. We must shut them down. And finally, from the perspective of racial equity in higher education for incarcerated, formerly incarcerated students, I've come to understand that accountability calls us to advocate to make sure that students get more opportunity, as I said, and that that opportunity is accessible and equitably distributed, of course. But we have to do that in particular ways that are transparent so that we're clear about what we're doing and why, in ways that have us ready to learn at the same time that we're teaching, ready to course correct when we've lost our way. And sometimes once we get in, we lose our way, don't we? We have to be ready to change as we grow, to generate opportunities to use the work that happens in classes as a gateway to freedom work and justice work toward liberation. And I end emphasizing that I hope that as this exciting institute goes forward, we focus not only on how to do our work better, but to make sure that our work is informed by what we've learned from our teaching, not just the pedagogy, but the teaching about freedom and about the power of liberation. As advocates worried about access, we have to think of ourselves as more than teachers or program administrators or learners or even students. We have to think of ourselves as freedom fighters, justice workers, feminist abolitionists. And when we do that, I believe we'll do that. And as we do that, I want you to know how honored I am to be aligned with you in that project. Thank you.